On Thanksgiving, everything changed for me. People say the holiday is about gratitude, about coming together as a family. But that day, my sister didn't carve the turkey, she carved open my life. 1 second, everyone was laughing and passing plates around. The next, Juno stood up, grabbed the remote, and with a proud, smug smile, projected my private financial statement onto the living room wall. My $12.6 million net worth glowed in big white numbers, while every jaw in the room dropped. But no one was shocked in a good way. There were no congratulations, no hugs, no pride. Instead, I watched something darker rise in their eyes: greed. Pure, hungry greed. My name is Amelia, and for most of my life, I was the invisible daughter. I grew up next to Juno, the miracle child, the fragile one, the star of every family conversation. My parents, Darla and Vance, made our whole house revolve around her. If she sneezed, the world paused. If I achieved something, it was just fine. Nana Lorraine was the only person who ever saw me, really saw me, and she taught me to appreciate old things, rare things, and little details. I didn't know then, but she was planting the seeds for the career that would one day change my life. What my family didn't care to notice was that I worked hard. I studied on scholarships, worked odd jobs, and built an art authentication business, quietly, privately, and without their help. They assumed I was broke, struggling, just getting by. And honestly, I let them think that. It was easier. It kept them out of my business. I even sent money for Juno's endless degrees, each one abandoned halfway. They believed they were helping me. In reality, I was helping them. But the moment those numbers hit the wall, everything shifted. Before the pumpkin pie even reached the table, the demands began. My mother wiped fake tears and cried about Juno's potential and how I needed to support her dreams. My father talked about family duty and shared success. And Juno? She didn't even pretend. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You owe me a future." In that moment, something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a sharp, quiet way that felt final. A lifetime of neglect, guilt-tripping, and being overshadowed turned into clarity. They thought discovering my net worth gave them access to my life. They had no idea that I had been keeping a ledger of my own for years. Not of money, but of every lie, every manipulation, every moment they made me feel small. That day, my betrayal didn't break me. It woke me up. And as they sat there arguing over what they thought I owed them, I realized something powerful. They had seen the number, but they still didn't see me. And soon they were going to learn what that really meant. I grew up always in the background, never the center of attention. My sister Juno was delicate, always needing care, always getting fussed over. If she sneezed or felt tired, the house would pause. My parents, Darla and Vance, spent hours worrying about her health, her comfort, her happiness. I learned early that my own feelings didn't matter much. I had to be careful, quiet, almost invisible, because attention was always reserved for her. I wanted to matter, but it felt like no one noticed. The only person who truly saw me was Nana Lorraine. She had a way of looking at the world that was different. She taught me to notice small things. The way sunlight hit a painting, the way a corner of an old book smelled, the way an antique vase held a story. She encouraged me to keep journals, to take notes on everything I observed, to appreciate beauty in old things. That guidance became my secret world, the place where I could be important and feel valued. I remember one moment that stayed with me forever. I was a teenager and had entered a national art history competition. I had spent months studying, writing essays, and preparing a presentation about a rare Renaissance painting. When I won first place, I felt proud, excited, ready to share my success with my family. But they didn't come. Not a single one of them. They said Juno had a high school play audition at the same time. And of course, that was more important. I sat in the empty hall, holding my certificate, feeling a mix of joy and loneliness that I couldn't explain. Nana Lorraine was there, of course, smiling proudly, but it didn't fill the space of my parents' absence. Those experiences taught me to rely on myself, to find strength in quiet moments, and to take joy in what I loved, even if others didn't notice. They also planted the first seeds of resilience. I realized early that people might overlook me, underestimate me, or even take me for granted. That didn't mean I was weak. It meant I had to be clever, patient, and persistent. I learned to observe, to listen, and to act when the moment was right. Living in Juno's shadow shaped who I became. The constant care she received, the family focus on her needs, the unnoticed accomplishments. It all created a quiet fire inside me. I learned to treasure small victories, to value knowledge and detail, and to trust only the few who truly saw me. It was in that invisible foundation of my childhood, built from neglect and observation, that the woman who could later take control of her life was born. I learned that even in the shadow of someone else, I could grow, prepare, and one day stand in the light. This invisible foundation became the beginning of my strength, the first step in understanding my own worth, and the quiet power that would guide me through the betrayals to come. I built my life quietly, without anyone noticing. While my family thought I was just dabbling in a hobby, I was creating something real and valuable. I spent hours studying, learning the history of art, and understanding the details that most people overlooked. Every painting, every antique object held a story, and I wanted to be the one who could uncover it. Mr. Albright was the first person to take me seriously. He was an elderly antiques dealer with sharp eyes and little patience for nonsense. Most people found him intimidating, but he saw something in me. He taught me to examine every item closely, to notice the small cracks, the faint marks, the hidden signatures that proved authenticity. He pushed me to work harder, to question everything, and to never settle for less than precision. I learned to trust his guidance, to embrace his tough lessons, and to apply them even when no one was watching. I spent years moving between dusty attics, old houses, and high-security vaults. Some days were exhausting, climbing ladders or crouching in narrow spaces to inspect a piece. Other days required delicate care, handling fragile antiques with gloves and extreme attention. The work was hard, and it was often lonely. But it was mine. Each authenticated piece added to my reputation, though almost no one outside that circle knew of it. Meanwhile, my family believed I was wasting my time. They assumed my little hobby cost more than it earned, that I was simply amusing myself without making a real living. I let them continue thinking that. It gave me a strange kind of safety. If they underestimated me, they wouldn't interfere. I could grow my business in secret, without pressure, without expectations, and without jealousy interfering in my plans. Their ignorance became my shield. Over time, I became known in the antiques world for discretion and accuracy. Collectors and dealers trusted me with valuable pieces because they knew I treated each object with care and respect. My name, though unknown to my family, carried weight in places that mattered. The long hours, the careful study, the small victories no one else saw, all of it built something strong and independent. By the time my family would ever learn the truth, I would have a foundation no one could shake. The work I did in silence, the trust one earned from mentors and clients, the skills I developed through hard, patient labor, all of it became my self-made cage. It wasn't confining, it was protective. I had created a life of value and control, separate from their expectations, and I carried it forward quietly, letting the world underestimate me while I quietly prepared for the moment I would finally step out of the shadows. As the years passed, Juno's life grew more extravagant. She traveled, shopped, and enjoyed luxuries that I quietly helped fund, sending money under the pretense of family support. I kept my head down, letting her take what she wanted, thinking it was easier to keep the peace. But one afternoon, a colleague mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Juno had been telling people that I was the one being supported by our parents, painting me as the dependent sibling while she enjoyed her lifestyle. Hearing this, I felt a mix of shock, anger, and betrayal. That was the moment I decided to take control. I began a ledger, not of money, but of truth. I wanted to hold every unfairness, every manipulation, and every lie in one place, a record that no one could ignore. I started documenting Juno's false stories about me, the times she twisted facts to make herself look needy or important, and every guilt-laden call from my mother about how I should provide more. I included my father's requests for more money, usually for some new plan Juno had, and the way they all treated me as if I existed only to serve their desires. The ledger became more than just notes, it became my shield. Every detail I wrote strengthened my resolve, turning my anger into something tangible. I recorded dates, times, conversations, and the smallest evidence I could find. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about truth, about keeping track so that when the time came, I could act with clarity rather than emotion. I spent late nights adding entries, reviewing old receipts, rereading messages, and checking the accuracy of every claim. With each addition, I felt a growing sense of power and confidence. The ledger reminded me that I was not powerless, that I could see the patterns and lies clearly, even if my family could not. I learned to anticipate their manipulations and to expect the unexpected. It also became a private reminder that I deserved respect and fairness. By documenting everything, I was reclaiming my own sense of reality, seeing my worth separate from the roles they forced on me. I wasn't just keeping track of betrayals. I was learning to trust myself, to validate my own experiences, and to prepare for a moment when the ledger would no longer stay hidden. By the time I looked back at the growing collection of entries, I realized I had built more than a record. I had built a fortress of truth. Each betrayal, each manipulation, each lie became a brick. And in that fortress, I found clarity, strength, and the quiet power to finally step out from under the shadows of my family's false stories. The ledger was no longer just paper. It was my armor. As Thanksgiving approached, something felt wrong. My mother, Darla, was unusually eager for the entire family to come, insisting everyone had to attend. Her excitement didn't feel warm. It felt calculated, heavy with expectation. Juno, on the other hand, carried her usual smug confidence, as if she already knew something I didn't. The way she smiled, the way she casually mentioned plans, it all set off a warning inside me. I sensed that this holiday dinner wasn't going to be ordinary. I started thinking carefully about how to handle it. I had my ledger, my secret record of every manipulation, but I needed more than that. I needed a way to make the truth undeniable, a moment where my family couldn't twist facts or ignore reality. I realized that they were about to ambush me emotionally, to demand more than I was willing to give, and it gave me an idea. I decided to create a little stage, a subtle trap that could turn their plan into mine. I placed my laptop in the living room where everyone would see it, making sure it was open to the financial statement I had kept private for so long. The numbers glowed clearly on the screen, impossible to miss. I knew Juno's curiosity and her tendency to pry would lead her straight to it. She had a habit of noticing things that didn't belong to her, of poking into anyone's business if it promised her advantage. I trusted that instinct. At the same time, I prepared myself mentally. I went over what I would say, how I would react, and how I would stay calm no matter what was thrown at me. I reminded myself that this wasn't about confrontation for the sake of anger. It was about showing the truth and reclaiming control. I had been underestimated for years, but now I could use that against them. As the day drew nearer, I kept everything ordinary on the surface. I cooked, I cleaned, I greeted family members warmly, all while knowing exactly how the evening would unfold. The laptop sat quietly on the table, a silent signal waiting for Juno's eyes to fall on it. I didn't have to do anything to bait her. I only had to wait. When the family arrived, everyone chatted, laughed, and settled into their usual spots. Juno moved around the room, confident and curious. I watched her carefully, noticing the way she glanced at the laptop, the slight pause in her step as she realized what she had found. I stayed composed, smiling politely, letting her take the first move. The trap was set perfectly. I knew the moment was coming. The moment when my family's assumptions would collide with the truth, and I would finally have the upper hand. For the first time, I felt fully ready to face them, not as the quiet, invisible daughter, but as someone who had prepared, observed, and planned every step of the way. Everything was in place, and now it was only a matter of time. The house was busy with chatter and clinking dishes as everyone settled in for Thanksgiving. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but tension hung in the air. I stayed quiet, observing, my eyes on Juno, who moved confidently toward the laptop. She didn't hesitate. Her curiosity and sense of entitlement guided her hands. When the screen lit up, showing my financial statement, the atmosphere shifted instantly. What followed surprised me in one way, but confirmed my expectations in another. My family didn't express pride or even interest in my achievements. They didn't pause to admire the years of effort behind the numbers. Instead, they reacted with immediate, sharp demands. Voices rose, questions piled up, and expectations were laid out like a shopping list. I could feel the tension grow, but I remained perfectly composed. My mother's tone became urgent as she spoke of opportunities for Juno, of how I should provide for her sister's education, travels, and ambitions. My father reminded me of responsibility and family loyalty, suggesting I had obligations I couldn't ignore. Juno, standing there with her usual confident smile, seemed to soak it all in, taking in every reaction and adding her own remarks about what she deserved. Every word from them reinforced the pattern I had long noticed. It was never about gratitude, acknowledgement, or fairness. All they saw was the figure on the screen, a number they believed unlocked a lifestyle they thought they had earned. I felt their sense of entitlement pressing on me, the way they calculated how much I should give, how quickly I should act, and what they assumed was their right. I stayed calm, letting them speak, letting them reveal themselves. Their greed, their assumptions, and their disregard for my life and efforts were all visible now. They had shown their true colors, a family that measured me by what I could provide rather than who I was. In my mind, I traced each line of their behavior, remembering every slight and manipulation from the past. As the discussion went on, I realized the trap had worked exactly as planned. I didn't need to argue or defend myself yet. Their own demands and words exposed their priorities. They had believed that seeing my finances would give them leverage, but they had only shown me the clarity I needed. I could see the structure of their greed, the patterns of expectation, and the flaws in their assumptions. By the time the conversation slowed, it was clear that the balance had shifted. I remained quiet, letting the room fill with their voices, their urgency, their insistence. The display of entitlement had reached its peak, and I watched carefully, knowing I was ready to respond on my own terms. The evening had begun with a feast, but it had become a demonstration of control, patience, and observation. The trap had captured exactly what I needed, the truth of who they were. I watched as the room buzzed with demands and complaints, my family circling around, each voice trying to push me into submission. I stayed calm, letting their words fill the air while I waited for the perfect moment. Then I reached for the small, elegant journal I had hidden nearby, my ledger. It felt heavy in my hands, not with weight, but with the truth it carried. I opened it carefully, letting my eyes scan the pages one last time before I began. I spoke slowly, deliberately, reading aloud the first entry. I quoted my mother's pleas, letters, and texts where she asked for money for Juno's needs, painted with guilt and pressure. Each line was paired in my words with images and examples of Juno's extravagant lifestyle, luxury trips, expensive gifts, and indulgent outings captured on social media. The contrast was sharp, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Next, I addressed my father's repeated requests. Each tuition payment, every supposed necessary investment in Juno's education was detailed. I listed degrees she never completed, programs she abandoned, and the times my father insisted I fund them anyway. Every instance, every lie was documented, exact and precise. I didn't raise my voice or show anger. I let the ledger speak for itself. The cold accuracy of my record carried more weight than any argument could. As I moved from entry to entry, the room grew quieter. My family's reactions changed from irritation to confusion, and finally to stunned silence. They had assumed they could push me, guilt me, and manipulate me, but now their own actions were reflected back at them, clear and undeniable. Every word I read exposed the hypocrisy of their behavior, the selfishness hidden behind their supposed concern for family and duty. I continued, reading through the manipulations, the lies, and the patterns of entitlement. Each example was linked to a real event or evidence, each accusation supported by facts. My family could not argue with what was written, and they could not hide behind excuses. The ledger revealed the truth of years of imbalance, showing how their expectations were rooted in greed rather than care. By the time I closed the journal, the room was completely silent. Every eye was on me, every face showing shock, disbelief, or guilt. I didn't need to say more. The ledger had spoken. It was no longer a private record, no longer my hidden armor. It had become a mirror, showing them exactly who they were. Their hypocrisy, their manipulation, and their entitlement were laid bare in cold, precise detail, and I finally felt the balance shift. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was seen, and the truth was undeniable. The room was still heavy with silence after I closed the ledger. My family sat frozen, their faces a mix of shock, guilt, and disbelief. I could feel the tension, the weight of years of lies and manipulation finally settling around them. I stayed calm, letting the moment stretch, knowing the next step had to be clear and deliberate. Slowly, I reached for my phone. Everyone watched as I unlocked it, scrolling past messages and apps until I found the banking app one had used for years to quietly support my family. The numbers on the screen reminded me of every sacrifice I had made, every time I had put their wants above my own. But now, those numbers would no longer control them. I tapped through the settings, canceling every automated transfer to my parents and to Juno. Each confirmation felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. I looked up and announced clearly and calmly that as of this moment, all financial support for them was terminated. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. No pleading, no arguing, no excuses could undo them. I continued, explaining that any further discussion about money, any demands or attempts to manipulate me, would be considered harassment. I made it clear that I would involve my lawyer if necessary, that my boundaries were no longer flexible, and that my generosity had limits that had long been crossed. My family's expressions changed from shock to anger, but I remained steady, refusing to be drawn into their usual guilt games. Every word I spoke reinforced my control. For years, I had quietly carried the burden of their desires, funding dreams that weren't mine, paying for indulgences while pretending it was normal. Now the power had shifted. I was no longer invisible, no longer trapped by their assumptions or expectations. The ledger had revealed the truth, and the phone completed the reckoning. My family had seen the full picture of my contributions, and now they saw the consequences of their greed and manipulation. They had assumed access to my life and my money, but they had never understood the discipline and effort that created my success. By the end of the announcement, the room was tense, quiet, and filled with a new understanding. I had drawn a clear line. My generosity was no longer at their disposal, my life no longer subject to their control. I put the phone down, feeling a sense of relief and power I had never known. The financial reckoning was complete, and I was free to live without the weight of their demands. After the Thanksgiving dinner ended, I left the house quietly. The room had been shattered by the ledger and my announcement about cutting off financial support. I walked out without looking back, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time, the weight of their expectations, their greed, and their demands didn't touch me. Silence became my ally as I stepped away from the chaos that had defined my family for so long. In the weeks that followed, I took steps to protect myself. I blocked their numbers so their calls and messages could no longer reach me. Every attempt at contact was cut off before it could disturb my peace. My lawyer sent formal cease and desist letters, making it clear that any further harassment or financial demands would be met with legal action. It wasn't about revenge in the dramatic sense. It was about setting boundaries and enforcing them. I realized that the strongest answer to their behavior was quiet, firm action, not anger or confrontation. With that chapter of my life closed, I focused on building a life that reflected my effort, skill, and independence. I found a beautiful, peaceful home for myself and Nana Lorraine, far away from the constant noise and drama of the old household. The space was serene, filled with sunlight and quiet corners where we could read, work, or simply enjoy each other's company. It was the kind of home where I could feel truly safe, where my accomplishments could exist without interference, and where I could finally breathe freely. My business, which I had built in secret for years, began to thrive even more. Without the emotional drain of family demands, guilt trips, and constant interruptions, I could focus fully on my work. I traveled, authenticated antiques, and managed collections with care and precision. Clients trusted me even more because I could give each task my full attention. Every day, I felt the satisfaction of seeing my efforts grow and succeed, knowing that this success belonged entirely to me. Most importantly, I felt peace. The quiet kind that comes from knowing you have made your own path, that you no longer have to live under others' expectations or deal with manipulation. I didn't need to prove anything with anger or confrontation. My life itself became the answer. I realized that true revenge doesn't come from dramatic gestures or shouting. It comes from building a life that cannot be shaken by those who tried to control you. Watching Nana Lorraine smile in our new home, seeing the calm around us, I knew the real victory had been achieved. I had escaped the shadows of my family's greed and manipulation. I had found freedom, safety, and happiness on my own terms. The ledger, the silence, the boundaries, they were not just acts of retaliation. They were steps toward a life filled with respect, peace, and quiet triumph. For the first time, I felt completely in control, and it was the most satisfying feeling in the world. Looking back on everything, I can see how far I've come. For years, I was the invisible daughter, living in the shadows while everyone focused on Juno. My accomplishments were ignored, my feelings overlooked, and my life treated as if it belonged to someone else. I endured the neglect, the manipulation, and the constant demands without complaint, learning to be patient, careful, and observant. But all that patience wasn't wasted. It became the foundation for the life I have now, a life I built on my own terms. The journey wasn't easy. There were times when I felt trapped, frustrated, and unappreciated. I carried the weight of their expectations and tried to satisfy demands that never seemed to end. But every challenge also taught me something important: how to protect myself, how to notice patterns, and how to plan my steps carefully. I learned that strength doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from patience, observation, and knowing when to act. Every small lesson added up, shaping me into someone who could take control of her own life. Now, I feel the freedom I never had before. I have built a life that reflects my efforts, my skills, and my values. I live in a home that is peaceful, surrounded by comfort and quiet, with Nana Lorraine by my side. I can focus on my work, my passions, and my happiness without the pressure of other people's expectations. I have security, stability, and the space to enjoy the life I've earned. This freedom feels like a reward far greater than anything I could have imagined when I was young and invisible. I've also learned a deeper truth about family. It isn't just about blood or shared history. True family is made up of the people who respect your boundaries, who celebrate your successes, and who support you without taking advantage of your efforts. I realize that being surrounded by those who care only about what I can provide is not family. It is responsibility without love. Understanding this allowed me to let go of resentment and focus on those who truly matter in my life. The ultimate lesson I carry now is simple but powerful. Revenge is not about drama or confrontation. The real triumph is living a quiet, happy life on your own terms, free from manipulation and control. My past pain shaped me, but it does not define me. My success, my peace, and my freedom are proof that I am no longer invisible. I have control over my life, and I can enjoy it fully, without fear or compromise. That, I realize, is the true victory, the peace and happiness that comes from standing firm, making choices for yourself, and creating a life that belongs entirely to you.